And there it is.
Ready for a digital dive? You're listening to the GZ Chop Shop podcast, the weekly tech and gaming media podcast that breaks down the latest news, law, and more. So plug in because the GZ Chop Shop starts now.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another week of the GZ Chop Shop podcast. I'm your host, Project Itachi, joined by my good friend and co-host, Warners.
Hey.
And we have an amazing episode lined up for you guys this week. This week, we are going to break down a little bit of the history of indie development and the changing ecosystem of AAA games and pretty much how they go hand in hand. So it's going to be an interesting conversation with a little bit of the history and some opinions on what we think has caused the industry to shift. But before we get into that, if you guys have been a consistent listener of the show, or if this is your first time checking out the GZ Chop Shop podcast, thank you so much for spending some of your time with us. And think about checking out our website, osntachmedia.com, where you can catch all of the GZ Chop Shop podcast episodes all in one place. And think about visiting our store, osnmediashop.com, and grab yourself some exclusive merchandise from glasses to t-shirts and more. We're constantly updating the store, tons and tons of merch. And if you guys want access to our exclusive podcast, The Afterthoughts After Dark, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/OSN Media, where you'll get the full uncut versions of our show. Really, really good. It's pretty much different from what we do on the GZ Chop Shop. It's more candid, more topics, more variety, some juicy stuff on there. So make sure to check that out as well. Now, without further ado, let's dive in. The reason I wanted to talk about this week, because we've been covering pretty much for the past few months, we've been talking about AI, and then we were talking about Final Fantasy, and then we would come back to AI. We've been doing a lot of heavy stuff. So I wanted to talk
I'd still talk about AI.
And we still talk about AI.
Every week there's like something else. Now, I'm not going to take this on the rabbit hole, but it's like every week there's something else on AI, and I'm like, is no one listening?
Nope. We're probably going to forever be talking about AI. The reason I wanted to talk about indie development and AAA is because there's a lot of big changes happening in the gaming industry. You've got Microsoft and Sony competing with buying up all of these studios. And from your casual gamer perspective, it's just another acquisition. And a lot of people probably don't understand the significance of these moves other than their favorite developer having more power over what games go where. And I think this is a good chance for us to really break down the impact that these mega giant developers buying up smaller studios really has on the gaming industry as a whole. So to kick things off, I do want to give a little bit of history of indie development, which, in case a lot of people don't know, the term indie developer did not start until the year 2000. So it's actually fairly new. It's not even 30 years old. And it actually goes back to as far as 1963. Indie development was a thing. And back then, until the year 2000, it was actually called amateur developers or hobbyist developers. Those were the terms. It was more hobbyist and amateur. We didn't start calling them indie developers until the year 2000 to represent that they were independent developers.
I can see why the name was changed. You wouldn't get on Steam and be like, let me see what amateur, like, like you can click like indie development and indie games. Like there wouldn't be like amateur developer.
Yeah. And with the more accessibility for developers to get their games out there, they don't have to use shareware like back in the day. You've got, Steam, and the consoles are more open with their SDKs, allowing developers to put their games out there. So it definitely went more, it expanded beyond being just a hobbyist, because now the market is saturated. To be honest, it's saturated with indie developers. Because not every game out there that is an indie game is a banger. There's a lot of quick cash grab games out there that are just like, this did not need to exist. But it also shows that just as much as there's questionable games, there's just as many well-rounded, well thought out gems. I mean, you've got Minecraft, you've got Hades, you've got Undertale, you've got the Outer Wilds, you got there's like
Exile. Exile was a huge indie game when it first dropped.
Yeah.
Or Path of Exile. I'm sorry.
Path of Exile, Celeste. And then even though it did have a lot of controversy surrounding it, but it is now a really, really good game, No Man's Sky.
It didn't get love for a few years.
It didn't get love for a few years because they made a promise that they didn't deliver on. They did a AAA tactic and it backfired, so they had to deliver on their promise. And they pretty much have done so for free, which is something I wish AAA games would do.
You mean when they make mistakes, turn around and fix it, and then also not charge you the same amount of money? And then not charge
you because they were like, you know what, our bad. We screwed this up, so we're gonna fix it. So I want to also point out how indie games have cultivated our current status in games for AAA games. Now, everyone knows when you see a big developer and they're dropping a game, we all get excited, you know, woo. But a lot of people don't realize where some of these game concepts come from. And I'm going to start with a very obvious one. And it's the biggest one. It's my most hated. And this is the reason. I'm finally going to address the real reason I hate Fortnite. It's because Fortnite was not an original idea. It was created from a AAA developer, which got it more recognition. But the concept was not original to them. Not at all. It came from PUBG, which is an indie game from an indie studio that created a concept utilizing the Unreal Engine, which the whole thing that the big developers do, they made their engines more available, more accessible over the years so that indie developers could develop these gems because it helped the gaming market. Because what is still happening is when a gem like Hades comes out, or you get a developer like Respawn that comes out, the bigger studios take interest in them. And then they set out to acquire those studios, which a lot of the times, those studios, Respawn as an example, accept the offer made to them because as an indie developer, they're paying out of pocket or via crowdfunding, which is not always guaranteed. So most of the time, it's them paying out of their pocket. The technology they're using is limited. The resources they have are limited. The team is far smaller. Some games, they're literally a one-man, one-woman team. So then they're getting the backing they've always wanted from a recognizable name that'll bring them attention. And in turn, the AAA studio gains an experienced team that they don't have to spend money getting trained or building a whole new studio. They just pay to acquire the studio, their intellectual properties, and then they can make the money off of that. And in turn, the indie developers get the funding that they've always wanted to build the games. Now, the catch to that, I'm going to get back to the Fortnite thing, but the catch to that is they lose their independence because now they have to play ball by what the AAA studio wants. And we all know big studios don't like taking risks, and they don't like trying new things until a proven formula elsewhere shows it works.
Until an indie studio makes a game that's really popular and original so that they can come steal the idea and screw over that indie company.
And now
'Cause
we
that's-
come full
that-
circle.
Yeah,
back
because
to
that
the
tends to
PUBG.
be what happens because
Yeah.
they'll take the risks,
Yes.
but the AAA games won't until they have someone to profit off of.
Yes. And that's where we come full circle because Battle
Until then, they
Royals
just
was
put
not
out
a thing
garbage half the time.
until PUBG made it popular. And I use those, I say that intentionally. PUBG made it popular. It was a formula they had that made it popular. It's not the first, it's not the original, the end all be all, but it made it popular. It made the formula popular. And people loved it. And it was an indie studio. Now comes Epic Games along the way, solved the formula, but instead of doing them a solid, now I don't know, I could be wrong. If anyone knows the history between the indie team of PUBG and Epic Games, maybe Epic Games made a pitch to them and they decided, no, we want to retain our independence, which I say kudos to you. Keep pushing. Or if Epic Games just snubbed them and said, let's reskin this with bright, pretty colors and sell it as our own thing. Because there was that whole lawsuit, which unfortunately the developers of PUBG, they lost when they did try to take Epic Games to court for basically stealing the formula. And Epic Games' only argument that won for them was, well, it's our engine that you used to make that game that made it popular. So without our engine, your game wouldn't have existed. And I was
Epic's
like,
starting
well,
to sound a lot like EA.
yeah. And then Fortnite took off. And that's the game that everyone recognizes.
Man, when was that? Was like 5 or 6 years ago, too. That was a while ago.
Mm-hmm. And now it sits at the pinnacle of gaming in general. Everyone knows Fortnite. But it was born off of the back of PUBG, which in turn has caused PUBG to fall into a niche category. It was the pinnacle of battle royals because it was what made battle royals popular. Then Fortnite came along, took the formula, mixed it up with some pretty colors, added a couple new elements, and then took the throne. And the indie developers, they really don't get their comeuppance for that. You know, they're just kind of like kicked to the side. Yeah. So here you have this AAA studio that bolstered their revenue, their numbers off the back of an indie studio without giving them their due. And then you have developers like Microsoft that go around acquiring the smaller studios in bulk or in mass to gain their IPs. Now, Bethesda's not small by any means. Activision Blizzard isn't small by any means, but they are just the most well known. They make the biggest, they had the biggest wave because everyone knows who they are. So we aren't realizing how many smaller studios they're scooping up on the side as well. I mean, did you know Netflix takes part in this too? They're scooping up indie developers as well.
Indie developers is in gaming. Indie developers
As in gaming,
for,
indie
for
developers.
mobile gaming.
Yep.
For their mobile.
Yep.
They've been trying to push this mobile gaming thing for a while. I wasn't. Last I saw, they weren't like it was working for them, but it wasn't anything that was super popular.
Yeah, but because they're indie and lesser known, it doesn't make headlines. But all of the big publishers understand the potential of indie developers.
I'm gonna be so mad if Netflix pulls off getting into gaming.
Oh, they will.
Just based off the shit movies they make. Can you imagine the games they make? And then they have the audacity to give us live action animes that are horrible and don't even come close to like they don't translate well enough to begin with anyways. But can you just imagine the games that they'll try to put out? Anyways, Microsoft.
Yeah. So like, you know, between Microsoft and Sony, they acquire independent developers to add their IPs to their catalog, which in turn expands their catalog overall. And the reason they have to constantly do these acquisitions, once they get these developers, that independence for them stops. And then they're either stuck having to keep doing the same thing, or they have to change focus and work on different projects.
Which, as of recently, this past 4 or 5 weeks, there's a couple companies that Microsoft scooped up that are upset with Microsoft. And one of them's Bethesda, but there was another one that I can't remember.
I said when Bethesda made that deal, I called it. I said Bethesda's going to get upset with Microsoft because everything Microsoft touches turns to ash. And people just refuse to acknowledge it. And here's the factual history to back this statement. I'm not saying it just because I don't like Microsoft. I'm saying it because history just shows, one, in terms of entering the gaming industry, period, the Western market, specifically the American market, was one of the last to step foot into it. For the longest time, for years, until like the 60s and 70s, we frowned on any type of digital gaming. It was frowned upon. It was frowned upon by politicians, religious groups, parents. It was seen as a waste of time. It was seen as only for children.
They blamed gun violence on it.
They blamed gun violence on it.
I remember when Halo 2 was making the news and it was getting blamed for gun violence. And I'm like, really? Killing aliens in the sci-fi world and another, other side of the galaxy? That's what you're blaming on?
Yeah. Parents would send their kids to therapy because they would spend too much time on video games. And we were so against the video game market that we entered it late. We didn't start entering until the big wigs sat back and were like, wait a minute. Japan's making a lot of money off of this. Other countries, they're making a lot of money off of this. You mean to say we've been missing out on money? Hey, video games aren't bad. Video games aren't bad. Let's get in this.
Nothing's bad if it makes money.
Nothing's bad.
They'll find a way.
Makes money. And hold on, because I gotta look this up. I was very flabbergasted. And I was like, there's no way that they're this old. Nintendo, the reason Nintendo cannot be messed with is because Nintendo has been around for a ridiculously long time.
Well, you got to think Nintendo's profit is gaming. They are like, that's the only thing they do. They don't have phone companies. They don't have TVs, which they've been talking about that. We had a show not too long ago where we talked about that. But Nintendo is solid gaming. They're in the top 3 in the gaming industry. Just gaming. Microsoft is on that list, but most of Microsoft money it does not come from gaming. They're not just gaming. Sony's not just gaming, but over half of it was for a while. They're also electronics.
Now, with what you just said, when do you think Nintendo was founded?
Late 70s, early 80s.
September 23rd, 1889.
Quit.
September 23rd, 1889. Kyoto, Japan.
What was the what was their initial goal?
I think they've always, so it was founded in 1989 by craftsman Fusajiro Yamauchi. Originally produced, they've always been in gaming. They originally produced handmade Hanafuda playing cards. They've always been about games. They've always been about games.
Nintendo's a fucking...
That's why no one can mess
They're
with
like
them.
a gaming ninja.
After venturing into various lines of business during the 1960s and acquiring a legal status as a public company, Nintendo distributed its first console, the Color TV game, in 1977. Nintendo is one of the, if not the OG of the gaming industry. We didn't start caring until the 60s, 70s. We didn't start caring until the 60s and 70s here in the Western Front. There's a reason Japan and even China have been thriving in the gaming industry long before.
So now I'm curious.
When did Xbox come out?
2000, 2001.
And how many consoles were already in existence by the time Microsoft introduced the first well-received American console?
Let's see, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, N64, and I think the GameCube. I think the GameCube came out when the original Xbox did.
Yeah,
because I think Burn had sent, because it was like a very nostalgic picture for me. I'd kind of forgotten about this, but there was a time in I think it was the year 2000, and it was GameCube, Dreamcast, PlayStation 2, and the Xbox, like the original Xbox.
The original Xbox. So you're looking at least almost 6-7 consoles from the Eastern side already in existence.
And that's, I mean, Sega, PlayStation, Nintendo, those are all Japanese.
Yeah. We hadn't stepped foot in the market yet. So our appreciation for it is still young. It's still, compared to Japan, it's still daggone in its infancy. Our generation, we're living the pinnacle for the most part of the American market's life in gaming. We lived at the tail. We came in at the tail end of when it was still being rejected, to making it accepted, to watching it thrive. While Japan did that like 100 years ago. So our
I can't believe I never knew this. That's wild.
Yeah, our appreciation for it is all monetary. It's all monetary, which is why I take so much issue with Microsoft's acquisition of indie developers, because these developers, they're coming in with a passion. They're coming in with a love of the craft, with a fresh idea. They're coming in with the inspiration that got a company like Nintendo going. And then here comes Microsoft, and they're like, hey, we don't know jack shit, honestly, about games. We really don't care. We just want acquisition. We got our fanboys in the back here that are going to yell hoorah for us. Let us buy you. And then once we're bored, we'll just close up shop.
You know, that's something we've kind of discussed in depth too about is, and we had a little mini conversation before the show started, that take Sony, for instance, by all means, they acquire IPs, and they've bought a few studios and companies, and mostly, not always, but mostly historically, it's been in response to Microsoft buying something. The past couple years, we've seen some back and forth between these two juggernauts. Just Microsoft would buy someone, and Sony would buy someone right after, and it was like, and we would call it too. We'd be like, "Watch, Sony's going to buy something right after this," and I'm sure a lot of it came down to snatching something before someone else did. Business is business, right? However, the takeaway that catches my eye, and it's not like I used to have an Xbox. I've just grown to understand the gaming industry much more over the past 10, 15 years, that I can appreciate when I'm wrong and when a company is shitty, when in regards to its fan base and its consumers, which Microsoft is. And we talked about this before the show a little bit, how Sony PlayStation tends to have a ton of third parties that they have worked with over the past few decades that they could probably buy out. By all means, Sony's a very rich company. Yeah. But instead of buying them out, they let them make their games, and they just have stakes in their company, in their business. And then through contracts and agreements, they pick up the games, and we talked about this. FromSoft is a huge one. Sony does not own FromSoft. Sony and Tencent have shares in their company and the parent company, but they don't own it. And there's a ton of other IPs like that that work the same way. But Microsoft, on the other hand, they don't work through third parties. Looking through all the IPs they own and a lot of the games they put out, I wasn't able to. I'm not saying there isn't any, maybe there is one, but I could not find any third party studios that Microsoft works with just mutually. They get bought out or they don't work with them.
Yeah, it's our mentality.
And then they wonder why they don't have their own IPs. Nobody wants to synergetically work with them and help them develop things that they're just going to take over and then flush down the toilet. And I think their last big, huge failure was Redfall, which turned into their company getting pissed off because, they're tired of Microsoft spending all this money, buying stuff out. They let them fund them a little bit in return, right? They don't profit much off it. And then their games fail and they're only exclusive to the Xbox.
Yeah. And I say this all the time. Sony does shady shit. All the AAA studios do shady shit. The thing is, at least with Sony, they're letting a lot of their studios that they have stakes in maintain their independence. And I want to showcase some things here to show how owning and taking away that independence can screw something up, or having too much influence in it messes things up. FromSoft, as a perfect example, Sony lets them cook, and Sony and Tencent usually foot the largest portion of a bill when they release a game. That's pretty much common knowledge now. Sony, when they say, hey, FromSoft's putting out a game, Sony usually foots most of the bill. And they don't make the games exclusive. So like Elden Ring and Dark Souls, they all get around. They only did it for one game, and it was Bloodborne. And look how well it did. Phenomenal. Microsoft was ticked. The players of Microsoft were ticked that they couldn't get their hands on Bloodborne. There's a reason Sony did it. And I think they were seeing the future coming down the pipeline to where we're pretty much heading now. But anytime outside parties are allowed in, i.e., big developers, investors, you wind up with a, I don't know, cyberpunk situation where now you've got all of these investors that have too much hearsay pushing for a game that's obviously not ready. And instead of letting that studio maintain their independence, they get to dictate the timeline. And then we get rolled out a unfinished, unpolished game. And even though it was common knowledge that it was investors pushing for it, the only reason the gamers piggybacked off of that uproar is because the investors loudly said, we want this game out. They made it public knowledge they wanted that game out. Of course, the gamers then jump in and say, well, now we want the game out. So then, CD Projekt Red's hands are tied and they got to put out this game. And then we get mad at the developers and not the investors who started the whole shitball in the first place. Which is why I wish there was a law in place that studios could not be interfered with. Like you could have a stake in them, but not like outright buy them. And when you brought up Redfall, that was another perfect example. They bought the studio, and now that studio has no independence to build the game they envision, how they would have built it to make it successful. They have to play ball under Microsoft terms, and look where that got them. What is Microsoft's last successful game from any studio they've acquired?
The only game that I feel has ever been truly successful, and it was just for Xbox, was the Halo series.
And how well did Halo Infinite do?
I mean, it did well enough, but it felt. I know the online user base was cut in more than half. I think it was down to 40% by the third or fourth month.
Mhm.
I mean, certainly there's enough people playing it that the servers continue and they keep putting out content,
Mhm.
but nobody talks about it.
The player base for a game retention did not jump until they acquired Bethesda Studio, and then they looked at the numbers of players that are still playing Fallout 4. And they're trying so hard to claim that as their game. It's like, no, you're talking about a game that was established before you bought Bethesda. Yes, it's part of your catalog, but that's not your game. And most of your player retention is on that game because you have nothing else to offer. You don't let your studios do what they're good at. Create the games the way they were meant to. You bought them because of their innovation. You bought them because they created successful games that gamers came to love, but you're not letting them do that. You're stuck in this, like, I don't get what direction they're trying to go. They wanted to do media, and it seems like they're trying to like shift the whole gaming industry to their benefit, which I'm like, once again, last people to the party, trying to change the whole theme of the party, and it drives me insane. Like like as I was going to say earlier, I wish there was a law that no developer, no AAA studio could completely buy and own indie developers. Like there was a law to protect indie developers because was it Microsoft tried to completely buy Discord? Granted, it's not a gaming thing, but they didn't want to have a stake in it. Everyone else has a stake in it, but they just wanted to outright buy them.
Yeah, I had a lot of respect for Discord. What was this? This was about 3 years ago, wasn't it? And
Something like that, yeah, like
it was
2 3 years ago.
about 3 summers ago. And I remember we were like, everyone was like, shit, like we don't want Discord. Like, what's gonna happen to Discord if, imagine logging on a Discord and then you just get ads and you get microtransactions. Like, not that Discord doesn't have some features, right, that you can utilize, but it's not forced down your throat. And playing like Discord is more than 100% usable. And then if you wanted to add something on there, just like maybe you had a huge Discord and you wanted to have like a lot of interactive stuff with higher quality, sure, it's like
Option.
it's like $10 a month or something like that. Like it's not like it's unfeasible. But we were like, we were wondering what was going to happen to Discord if Microsoft bought it out. And then I think it was 4 or 5 months after Discord said no. And I remember they put a message out after that. It wasn't anything that was, like ugly or unprofessional or shitty towards Microsoft, but it did kind of insinuate that they weren't going to sell out and they wanted to, that they were listening to us. And I like that they do that. They put out messages and they're like, hey, we hear you guys, XYZ, whatever. You can tell that it's still a small company and they're trying their best to keep Discord the way everybody has remembered it since it started and to keep everyone happy. They don't want to change too much, right? And a few months after they denied Xbox, they partnered with Sony, and it just cracked me up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they also have so many things that connectivity, like they've got the integration with YouTube. We talked about that before they did it, and then they turned around and did it when they integrated the watch together. And now PlayStation finally got off their high horse and allowed Discord chat to be used between the console and the server.
And I was surprised with that partnership because Sony is not one for integrating or partnering or any of that. They're very I guess like stoic and set in their ways. And by all means, like their ways work, but they don't typically play friendly like that with like outside companies, especially American companies.
I honestly can't say I blame them because, like I said, we have the mentality of, can I buy you and own you? Like we have a very owny owning personality. So, but with Discord, that's an example. You could look at them like an indie developer. Sure, it's not, it's not a game, but they're a
Yeah,
small company.
that's what I was thinking as far as gaming goes, they were, and I still consider them, even though they're more popular now, I still consider them indie.
Yeah, they've maintained their independence, and by definition, they are an indie developer. A lot of people think indie, like when your team grows, you're no longer an indie developer, you're major. No, as long as you maintain your independence, you by definition are still an independent developer.
I had a stroke on live camera.
It's
I smell toast.
The passion. But for example, until EA got Respawn and acquired Titanfall, Respawn, even though well known, was an indie development team. And then EA came along and killed Titanfall, but don't get me started on that. Another big company that killed an independent studio for no reason.
We'd be on Titanfall 5, right? We'd be on Titanfall 4 or 5 by now.
We would, but what did they decide to do?
Apex.
Because what was the trend? Battle royals stemming from the success of PUBG that got super saturated by Fortnite coming along and saying, yoink, we're just going to snatch this idea. And here we are today.
Which, by all means, like, I enjoy battle royales. I don't play them quite as much as I used to. And I like Apex. I like that, for the most part, the lore has stayed integrated and consistent. I think that's really cool that they've done that. But
do you want to know why you like Apex?
Well, I just like the lore.
Do you want to know why you like Apex?
Because of Titanfall.
Do you want me to break your heart right now?
Go ahead.
Apex is born off the skeleton of Titanfall 3.
Oh, yeah, that I knew. I knew that.
Yeah.
Which is why we've never gotten to Titanfall 3.
Yeah.
They were going to continue the story that way by giving us background and lore and whatnot. And I am, for the most part,
literally the skeleton.
Yeah.
It was in development.
And like I said, I enjoy the lore. I enjoy Apex for what it is. I do. But it's not Titanfall. And it does bug me. It shouldn't. But it does bug me that so many people play Apex and they have no idea what Titanfall is. And God, Jesus, dude, it wasn't too long ago I was playing Titanfall 2, back 4 or 5 months ago. I was just playing it for just fun, nostalgia. And all the guns that are in Apex that suck ass. But in Titanfall 2, those same guns are so good. So good. And the handle of the weapons and the movement of the character just feels so much better. I don't know how to describe it. It's just when you go from Titanfall to Apex, of course, it's a different game. The mechanics are slightly different, and the point of the game is different. But it's so weird how you could pick up the same weapons that do the same things, have the same names, but they play completely different.
Yeah. So I just was curious, since we were on the topic of battle royals, I wanted to know in Japan what the most popular battle royal is, because I had an ongoing theory, but I didn't want to say it unless I knew the facts. And I always had this inkling. I said, even with PUBG, I said Fortnite, Call of Duty, Apex, that's got to be a Western thing. That 100% has to be a Western thing. I was like, there's no way Fortnite is as popular overseas as it is here in the US. So I was just curious, and I was like, I know battle royal genre in general is popular. That's totally fine, because there's a whole different types of battle royal games, because you had the overnight sensation that also quickly died, Fall Guys. That's technically a battle royal of its own, but that's an enjoyable of a different type. The most popular battle royal in Japan right now is a game called Knives Out.
I've heard of that game.
Yeah, it's Knives Out. NetEase's Knives Out dominated mobiles battle royal genre. It is not Fortnite. And I don't even think Fortnite tops
This
in their lists.
so this might, I don't know, this might irk you a little bit. It bothered me. There are a large amount of people that consider League of Legends a battle royale. Because people, and I'm guessing in their minds, any game that involves multiple people facing off against each other, that to them that tells them it's a battle royale. It's not. It's a MMO.
It's
But
another reason.
MMORPG.
It's another reason I can't stand Fortnite. All of this traces back to the. It's the.
You're gonna have another stroke. I get your blood pressure went up.
Oh my gosh. I knew that the topic was going to be informative, but it was also going to irk me in the same way, because at the same time, I can just tell that once gaming became a trend, it just got messy. It just got messy. Once gaming became the thing, people just don't understand the history of what it took to even get here. You know, the true appreciation of the art form.
Well, I mean, you dropped knowledge on me. I had no idea Nintendo was founded in the late 1800s.
Yep. Nintendo is an OG by like 100 years.
I'm curious now when the first arcade popped up, like when the first arcades were popping up. I would guess it would have been in China, South Korea, or Japan.
You know, that would make sense, because we, like I said, since we were the last ones to the party, it had to be actually, well, let's find out when.
We're not fun, are we? Like Americans, we're not fun. Like we just piggyback off entertainment. Like it's just kind of like, it's just registering now. Like Japan has come out with Nintendo and Sony. They had Sega. They had all this entertainment apparently for well over 100 years, spanning since the late 1800s, and they're out here having all this fun, and we are like, they're having fun, but you can make money off of it, so we'll have fun too.
So the first, it seems like the arcade scene started as early as the late 1930s.
An arcade?
Yes.
What was in it? I mean, certainly it wasn't like
slot machines and like pinball machines. That counts as an arcade. So
slot
the
machines.
Style of arcade was different. That's all.
I mean, pinball machines, sure, but slot machines?
Yeah, slot machines.
Like gambling. Slot
Gambling
machines,
is
as in.
Dude, gambling predates.
I'm not saying gambling like gambling. I know what gambling.
I
I know how long gambling's been around, but.
And the mechanics of a slot machine really isn't that sophisticated.
I just picture myself walking into an arcade and I'm like, all right, do I want to lose money or lose money and have fun? Which one do I want to do?
Remember, we lived in Japan. There was like arcades everywhere. And I know you saw the pachinko places.
Yeah. I guess like in my head, I don't automatically put them together.
Yeah.
When I think of anything to do with slot machines, I think
casino.
I think depending on the state you're in, you're going to go to a state across the border where it's legal to do that. Because for some reason, all 50 of our states have vastly different laws when it comes to gambling.
Yeah.
It's weird.
But
like if you gamble here, you're going to prison. But if you walk 20 feet this way, you're good to go. Good. It's just so weird.
You're good. But yeah, the 1930s. I'm pretty sure it goes into detail of like where they popped up. But yeah, we've had arcades since the 1930s. So like gaming is in our DNA damn near. It's like it's always gonna happen.
1800s. Nintendo's been around since the 1800s.
Since the 1800s, yep. I remember reading that a long time ago, and it like actually I remember I was doing some stock research, and when Nintendo became available, they put the year company was founded. I thought it was a typo. I was like, oh, somebody's way off the mark. Did they mean like 1989? I was like, no, they've been around since before then. They already had games out in 1989. So I was like, oh, maybe they meant 1960, 19. They're like, no, it was founded in 1889. There's a reason no one fucks with Nintendo. Everyone bows in respect to Nintendo. This makes it more hilarious on why Nintendo laughed Microsoft out of the meeting that time when Microsoft came to them and was like, we want to partner up. And Nintendo laughed at them.
It does make it funnier.
It makes it way funnier.
It's like going to grandpa and asking for help with something. And he's like, it's your turn.
It's like, bro,
get fucked.
You know what? Because it's literally, yeah, it's like you're coming to them, and you know how Microsoft is. They never come with an idea of partnership. They come with an idea of conquest. And even though we all probably thought Nintendo was being dicks, I promise you Microsoft went in there with some shady deal that would have not benefited Nintendo. They wanted monopoly, because don't forget that also happened not long after Microsoft had to give up monopoly on the internet because Google took them to court because they had monopoly on the internet. Now they want monopoly on gaming. They're living the dream that I think they pitched to Nintendo years ago, and Nintendo laughed in their face because of it. Because Nintendo's like, bro, we've been around 100 years. You really think you're going to pull a fast one on us? Bro, we've been around since before you existed. You are in diapers compared to us. Bro, Microsoft, because what Microsoft, when was Microsoft founded? Hold on. It wasn't 1889. I'll tell you that.
I just imagine them asking that and Nintendo. I don't know why in my head, like obviously these are big companies and full of like lots of investors. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the meeting, but in my head, it was two main characters, and it was Microsoft asking Nintendo for basically, might as well just say, I want help. I want, without saying you want help, I want to just give you money and you help me. Mm-hmm. And just Nintendo's like, oh my gosh, and that are you. And then they just turn around and like walk away.
They just laughed them out of the meeting because, okay, Microsoft was officially founded in 1975. Yeah, no. Bro.
Well, Microsoft, but they besides, like Solitary and stuff like that. Minesweeper, whatever. Like basic computer games. When did they really found gaming? You know what I mean? Like that was in the late 1990s, early 2000s when the Xbox came out.
Once again, at this point, when they finally stepped in to the threshold where they're trying to talk to a company that's almost 100 years old and make a deal with them.
See, now I'm curious because I don't have any knowledge of this. Like when I asked this, I have no knowledge of this. What was the entire world using when computers first came out? What programs were they using? Now, were there just 50 million different programs and everybody was just using different ones before Microsoft kind of took over? And
at that time, personal home computers were,
it was just a DOS system in general.
Yeah, it was so few and far between. Only people,
companies were just using the DOS systems.
Yeah, I know there was other programs out there. I don't remember what they were called. It's also kind of like how there were other consoles that people forget about, like the Commodore 64.
Yeah, I forgot about that. I always forget about that one, and then someone brings it to that one too, and then I bring it up. I'm like, oh yeah, who owned that?
So there was other operating. So I don't remember if it was an internet browser or it was the whole thing. We had it too, but for like the internet, look how many different internet browsers. There were more internet browsers back in the day than there are now. You had Prodigy, AOL, that I think became MSN, Internet Explorer, Netscape, I think.
Oh,
it
dude,
was.
I forgot about Netscape.
Safari if you had a Mac, but that was all you had. That
You
was
know,
what you were stuck with.
kudos to Apple, because I hate saying this, because anyways, because they were in the computer business and the program business for a while with Microsoft in like the 80s and early 90s. Like they did have computers and stuff, and then I guess Microsoft just completely overshadowed, and there was a good while where you didn't hear anything, like nobody had Apple anything. And in my head, I'm like, who funded Apple? Like, and it's like they had like a lost void century. It's like
Yeah.
One Piece. Like they had like a lost void period. And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, we have the Apple
Yep, they just popped up.
phone and watch now. And everyone's like, oh, that's cool. Let's try that out. And then they came back and now they're making computers again.
Rich friends in low places.
I'm just like in my head, like I'm sure someone could, absolutely answer that, or I could spend 40, minutes on the internet and look it up. But it just popped in my head. You know what I mean? Like I'm sitting here like, what was Apple doing when they there was like a 15, 20-year gap where like, they didn't put out anything.
Yeah, they were planning and plotting, and it worked out. But we definitely want to, hear what you guys think. How do you feel about AAA studios acquiring indie developers? Do you think indie developers should be left alone and AAA should only have a stake in it? Do you think there's no harm in big companies buying AAA studios? Do you feel it's affecting the market? Because I definitely feel it affects the market. But that's a topic for another episode. So let us know your thoughts. Hit us up on Twitter at the GZ Chop Shop. Check out our website, osntechmedia.com. And on the show's page, you can submit your thoughts for us to possibly read on a future episode. But anyway, thanks for hanging out with us on this episode of the GZ Chop Shop podcast. You guys have been amazing. Take care of yourself and each other, and we'll catch all you wonderful people